If you've ever owned a dog, you know that dogs are sniffers. You know that dogs have this special ability to smell everything. And all they do all day long, even when you're trying to walk them to just relieve themselves or go to the bathroom, they're sniffing everything. And in reality, that is a stimulation to their brain. And so, what if we use that skill of dogs, their ability to smell things that we cannot even smell or even see, and to use it to find mold or invisible mold that is naked to our human eye and invisible to our nose? And what if we can find mold that is making us sick and finally do it right the first time so we can heal and live our lives as we are supposed to? I now eat a lot of meat, and so do they. If you want to thrive, you need to eat meat. Meat is required. Hey guys, my name is Judy Cho, and I'm board certified in holistic nutrition. And I have a private functional medicine practice where we focus on root cause healing, and that often starts with the Carnivore Cures all meat elimination diet. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Steven from Mold Dog Knows, KNOWS, and we talk through how they use dogs and their amazing olfactory senses to detect mold in homes where it's really hard for human detection to find. Before Steven got into the mold space and training dogs to detect mold in homes so that people are less sick, and he has dedicated his career in identifying hidden threats that can harm people. So when he used to train German Shepherds and other canine dogs to find drugs or explosives, and he makes very clear that you have to train them differently, now he uses this education and evidence-based research to train dogs to sniff out different molds and mold strains that are very harmful to human health. If you've ever remediated your home and then find later that you have to remediate again or there's more mold, it is the most frustrating and demotivating thing that can happen to you, especially in the mold and chronic illness space. Trust me, we have to see our patients when the lab test comes back or the ERMI test or HERTS-Me2 test come back, and it shares that they still have a high level of some type of mold in their home. And so we may think first, okay, maybe it's that the test is showing old mold and we just need to clean up and let's test again. And for some people, they test again and again, it shows mold. And then they have to go through the whole process again if they choose to. What they really care about is that they're still not healing and better enough. And it's really frustrating that their home is not getting better with them. And so in this conversation, we talk about, well, what else are other options we can do to ensure that most of the mold or mycotoxins that are growing in the home are being found so they can be remediated the first time and we do it right the first time. There's a saying where you measure twice and you cut once. So what if you use the ERMI or HERTS-Me2 or Petri dish or whatever test you want to see, is there even mold in the home? And then if there is, once you get an indoor environmental professional or an IEP, you may want to leverage a mold dog that has all the certifications and experience and training that Steven brings up in this recording. And I hope that as we get more eyeballs to this illness of mold illness in our water damaged buildings, that we can find easier solutions to live in a place that should be a safe haven for us. Okay, guys, let's get right into the interview. Hi, Steven. Thank you so much for joining me today. I met you at a mold conference. For the people that may not have heard of you, your work, if you can introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah. First off, thanks for having me on. I'm so excited for the opportunity to speak to you. And it's interesting because this is an audience that I typically don't necessarily speak to. Usually the people that I speak to are, canine people or researchers or even chemists, talking about some of the research we do. So as you said, my name is Stephen Antommarchi. I have been involved with dogs nearly all my life, all my professional life, I should say. So for the last 16 years, I've done a lot of research with dogs. I've worked dogs. I've worked an explosive detection dog, a narcotics dog, probably close to a dozen dogs in my professional life. Through that process, I've really not only fallen in love with the interaction and the bond, but really was curious about the science, even the chemistry behind how the olfactory sensors and the olfactory lobe and the bulb works in that beautiful dog's brain. just to get an idea of how are they fixing these or solving these complex questions that we often as humans can't even answer with the most sensitive equipment. They're basically walking mass spectrometers is basically what they are. And so with that, I've had a lot of inspiration in my life working with dogs. My first time I've ever even seen a working dog was at 9/11. I got to see dogs on the ground there looking for, unfortunate bodies. Um, so that was impactful as a young man to see that. I got to see that same dog actually, it looked like it had an injury on the side of maybe its ribs, and the handler must have had some medical background because it like sutured the dog right there after cleaning it, and the dog got right back up and started to work again. And I knew at that moment, like that's something super impactful. So as a young man, I knew at that moment that's what I wanted to do. I didn't know it would take me all the places it has, and it's taken me all over the world as a researcher, as a certifying official where I can certify dogs as a trainer. So I've touched a lot of different disciplines, whether it be medical side, whether it be explosive narcotics, human remains, you name it. It's been so much fun because with each of those disciplines, there are different questions that are often asked that only the dogs can answer.
Yeah, I heard this amazing statistic recently that I think billions of dollars have been used to find some type of technology to figure out where explosives are. And yet it's still not as good as a dog's nose. And so, if you can tell me a little bit more and get into the science of what is about a dog, its olfactory, and why do we use them for, like you said, explosives, drug finding bodies? I think even sometimes cancer and then blood
Oh
sugar
yeah.
imbalances, it's also used for that. If you can explain a little bit about what's going on.
Sure, it's amazing, and I think the study you're referring to is the Pentagon actually put like a couple $1 billion towards research to have like some type of mobile device that can detect explosives. And what they found the hard way was not only was it not as sensitive, but not as mobile. It would break down constantly, and finally they just cut the funding and said, you know what? We have this beautiful mobile olfactory detector. We're just going to continue to use that. And it's amazing how much research can go into it just to prove to us that the dog's ability to smell, even at the nanometer, their micrometer, is absolutely amazing. So what does that mean for us? And essentially, in layman's terms, dogs can break down odors in ways that we can't. When you and I go into a room and somebody's cooking, we often can identify pizza or steak or stew. Those dogs are not only identifying those odors, they're able to separate those individual odors. So, using the pizza analogy, they're going to tell me what type of dough is being used, where those tomatoes were sourced from, if there's pepperoni and what type of pepperoni, where we can't do that as humans. Our nose really don't have the capability. You know, when we process odors, we process it through our olfactory lobe, which is about the size of a stamp. And the dog's olfactory lobe is about 30% of its entire brain. So it's really geared toward breaking up odors and understanding how to separate them and coming up what we often will call like a scent picture. And these scent pictures can teach the dog, well, through training, what is it that we're asking them to do. And of course, like anything else, it's, classical conditioning and operant conditioning that will help communicate with the dog what's the work we're asking it to do and telling it when it's successful in doing that work.
So for dogs, because it has a bigger olfactory space,
Mhm.
does that mean that everything has a scent it gives off?
If you were able to ask the dog the question, I think the dog would be able to say absolutely that they interpret everything through their nose. They're still very visual because that's going to be their way that they're so mobile. And at the end of the day, they're predators, right? They have prey drive. They have the ability to do that. And we use those instincts to gain trust and understanding with that dog that if they do this job using their beautiful nose, there's going to be a reward that satisfies those instincts. So for me, part of my responsibility is not only to understand the capability of the dog's nose, but understand the natural instincts that it has. So when I communicate with the dog, I'm doing it in a natural way. And in other words, you probably have told your dog that it's a good boy or a good girl one time or two, and you can see that the dog's tail will wag. Well, it's communicating with you. Not only does it understand that, it understands your tone of voice, it understands your body language, that this is an enrichment kind of exercise that's happening right here, and I feel good about it. And we call that pack instinct. That pack instinct with the dog that's innately there helps us develop a relationship. And honestly, that's why they're man's best friend. This is why we can do so much. This is why we don't do it. No offense to the cat people out there, but we're not doing research with cats because they don't have that same thing. I mean, some cats you can pet them 1 second and the next time they're scratching you when you move away. Where dogs, it's not necessarily like that. That pack instinct is really engraved in them. So we utilize that because as humans, we kind of the same type of creature. We love the familial aspect. We want to feel secure in our relationships and our family. You know, my dog, which you had a chance to meet, Bear, is downstairs right now with my daughter, and I told her not to paint his nails because that's what she loves to do. He's a big, strong black German Shepherd, and she wants to paint his nails pink, or whatever color she wants because she thinks it's cute, and it is cute. But the idea is simple. I have a dog that not only can work at a high level, but because of that pack instinct, can be involved in my family intimately and understand when somebody's upset, when someone is happy, and really just is an incredible asset to our family and more than just its nose.
One thing you brought up in person was there are studies about how dogs can smell emotion. And I thought, and I was telling you that I thought it was something that we're sharing. So I would just smile at my dog, even if I'm having a hard day. And you're like, no, 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 it's beyond that, that you're probably giving. And so if you could share that study, and it's fascinating because I know in the human research space, they try to share emotion with physical touch. So
Hmm.
they'll have, and I was actually part of one of the studies, but they would say, touch this person as if you love them. And so it's like the way that you might squeeze a little bit tighter and longer, or if you're mad, it might be a little bit snappy. And so we try to explain that with physical touch, but we obviously can't do that with our scent. But for
Yeah.
some reason and way, dogs can do that. And so if you can explain that study and what does that mean then? Like, how does that translate to finding drugs or finding explosives? And then obviously we're going to get into how then we can leverage this to then find toxins in our home.
Yeah. Think about all the ways that you and I communicate with the world. Like just the way you explain that with certain touch, you
Mm-hmm.
can communicate so well with another human. Whether you're tapping them on the shoulder to get their attention or you're slowly kind of stroking their shoulder and giving them comfort. It's so interesting that you mentioned that because, yeah, as we mentioned before, the dog is interpreting a lot through its nose, but its eyes as well. But if we covered our face and we were deeply feeling an emotion, that dog will respond to the emotion without having to look at our face, which is incredible because you and I get a lot of information from our facial expressions. So when you're sad, I feel sad. This is why the cinema is so effective because you feel those emotions through a big screen TV. Even absent of the physical ability to see a face, the dog can still understand the emotion that we're going through. And you can teach a dog, for instance, we have dogs who are trained to help testify in really serious cases where children were, let's just say, taken advantage of by an adult. And in those cases, those dogs are designed or trained rather to sit next to that child during cross-examination. And their one job is to be as quiet as possible and to comfort that child when that child feels stress or anxiety. Think about how important that is. You're asking a child to take the stand in a court of law and be cross-examined but they have this beautiful sense of security in that dog that when the child starts to cry, if the child cries, the dog will pick up a piece of tissue and lay it on the child's lap so that the child can be soothed that way. And it's just there. So a lot of times the dog is not even seeing the face of the child because it's underneath a desk. So I wish that I can tell you specifically all of the ways the dogs are solving these problems that are in tune with us. And I say it all the time. I don't know if it's a good idea if they could speak to us because I'm pretty sure my dogs would tell me how dumb I was for all the assumptions I made about them and how wrong I am. But in one sense, it would be amazing to have a conversation with them because they are absolutely figuring out problems in ways that we simply can't understand because we don't share the same biology.
So maybe we don't understand how the mechanistics of them being able to detect explosives, but that reward system helps us to understand that they get it because then they'll find it, then we give them a treat. So how does that work? How do you train them, for example, for any type of explosive, if you want to bring that up? And then how, if you want to shift, how we then train for different mold species.
Yeah. And it really doesn't matter what you're teaching the dog to
Okay.
to smell out. I mean, we as humans have ideas about how dogs can assist us. So in World War I, we use these dogs to sniff out explosives. That's really important job because it keeps us safe. And then as the 60s, 70s came and the war on drugs came, we recognized that these poisons on our street, especially in our schools, needed to be combated, and these dogs' ability to smell those things were really at a high level. And then as we go on, you mentioned like cancer detection dogs, which is absolutely amazing to think that cancer has an odor or a vibration of some kind that the dog is picking up on. All of those things are important to say, okay, what is it that I want this dog to smell out? And let's come up with a training module that will fit that dog. Well, what people often misinterpret is every dog is its individual, just like a human is. And I would often say dogs are more like athletes than anything. I have to ask myself, what sport do I want that dog to play? And I can actually pick the correct dog for the right sport. So let me go a little further. If I want a basketball player, and that's on the human side, that's what I would want someone who maybe can jump high, who was tall, who had really good hand-eye coordination. But a golf player wouldn't need all those things. He probably really could use the hand-eye coordination, but all those other attributes are not necessary. So when we ask a dog to do a certain job, we have to ask what attributes does it have innately that allows it to do that job? The example I gave with the essentially the emotional support dog in court, that specific dog's characteristics are way different than what I would want for narcotics detection or mold detection. What I would want in that case is a dog whose hunt drive is super high and their willingness to work for a long period of time is very high. Where, that dog that's in court, I would actually want that to be super low and them to be prioritizing their pack instinct more than the ability to go out and hunt. So I have to analyze those dogs, and that's part of the research is we have canine profiles, like literal profiles for each dog that gives the characteristics. And for me, it's probably the most fun I have in my job is to no preconceived notions. You can be a German Shepherd and have all these different instincts, and you could be a German Shepherd and have way different ones. So it's not even about the breed often, it's about testing and recognize those specific characteristics that it has to place the dog correctly with the job it's going to be most successful doing naturally.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, are certain dogs, regardless of the breed, some of them will not be as good at, let's say, detecting mold versus being an emotional or a pack support?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey guys, just a really quick break. Nutrition with Judy's private practice is now called Empower Functional Health. I started as a nutritional therapist, but we have become much more all-encompassing. At Empower Functional Health, we do functional medicine, chronic illness, autoimmune, gut health, environmental illness such as SIRS, mold illness, Lyme. Regardless of all these names, the goal for us is always to get you root cause healing answers. And of course, carnivore, the all meat elimination diet is always on the table. Food, the right food, is always medicine. We offer functional tests, prescription meds, and really everything to get you closer to root cause, where you can just eat the meats you enjoy and live the life that you are meant to symptom-free. The goal is to get off meds, supplements, and everything else that your body no longer needs support in. Our practice, whether it's Nutrition with Judy, sharing podcasts and free content, or our private practice, Empower Functional Health, our goal is to support you guys in the barbell theory. We give a lot of free content, our evidence-based research. We don't use Substack. We give all our stuff away for free. We interview with the best and make it super tactical so you have clinical pearls that you can walk away with and try in your own healing journey. And then we work with some people in a smaller subset, one-on-one, to provide that level of personalized care. And as we heal these people that are chronically ill, we find these clinical pearls and golden nuggets that we can share then more publicly so that we can make wellness for all. Hopefully, the content and the guides and the free stuff we give out is enough for you to heal. But if it's not, you can always come and work with us in our private practice so that you can get more personalized care. If you want to learn more, make sure to check out empowerfunctionalhealth.com.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. I mean, because you and I would assume learn differently, and we
Yeah.
also have different passions. So there are going to be things that you that are drawn to that are drawn to you that stick with you, and they'll never leave. Like a steel trap, it's there forever. But for me, it may not be the same thing depending on the subject. So our responsibility as trainers and researchers is to really identify what those things are. And we can go into so many because there's so many different instincts within a dog that we list them and we actually score them from like 0 to 100. This allows us to look at that score sheet and say, this dog's characteristics will actually be best suited for explosive detection or whatever it may be. That's super helpful because the last thing you want to do is ask a dog to do a job that it actually doesn't want to do or is not naturally capable of doing. So they all can smell so well, but other attributes or characteristics are just as important.
Why is it then that majority of the like police force use German shepherds?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the reason why, and you met my dog who's a German Shepherd, that we love to use that breed is basically they were designed to have a lot of pack instinct. Also, they have the physicality to do the job. As much as we've had in our family, we've had like little chihuahuas and stuff. As much as I love them, they're not going to be police dogs, right? As yappy as they could be, as fearless as they can be, maybe that's good that they're not 100 pounds. That'd be scary. But as fearless as they can be, we want to make sure that we're putting the right dog for the right job. So critical thinking is a big part of police work. And the German Shepherds, the Belgian Malinois, the Dutch Shepherds, the Labs, some of the Golden Retrievers do an incredible job of critical thinking. So I'll give you an example. They will all often solve a problem, but get there differently. So if the objective is, hey, there's a guy in the ceiling somewhere hiding, German Shepherd, I want you to find that person. Well, the olfactory sensors are pretty good for both the German Shepherd and maybe the Belgian Malinois, which a lot of military films will kind of highlight because of their athletic ability. And the military uses those dogs a lot. So the German Shepherd will come into the room, identify where that person is using their nose, and then you're saying, "Hey, I need you to get up there." Well, the German Shepherd will fix these problems differently. They will actually recognize, oh, that person's up there. I can't reach them. Is there a way that I can push maybe furniture together and step on the furniture to get closer to that? That's one way to solve the problem. Where the Belgian Malinois may come in and say, oh, yeah, there's the person up there. How do I get there? I'm going to use my physicality and only my physicality. They're going to parkour off of walls and try to get there and maybe hurt themselves and do it again and do it again. They're physically specimens. They're incredible. But the ability to critically think at the high level sometimes is not there. And that's a generalization, of course. You can have German Shepherds that are relying more on their physical ability and vice versa with the Malinois. But yeah, it goes back to what is our purpose for that dog? And are we selecting not only the right breed, because physicality means something, but the right instincts and making sure that it's aligned with our mission?
So let's move it to mold. Obviously, mold, you and I were talking about there are so many different species. Certain species are more harmful, and if it's not a natural species in that location. But how do you start training all the different species for dogs to start detecting so that humans don't have illness in their homes?
Yeah. So what's incredible about dogs is they're capable of learning in a systematic way that is often referred to as fast mapping. Fast mapping is incredible because there's not a lot of animals or yeah, there's not a lot of animals that can do this. And so let me kind of paint the picture for you. Let's say you have 5 boxes and you're going to number them 1 through 5, left to right. And you're asking the dog, hey, box number 3 is the one that I want you to respond to. In this case, it's the mold. And let's say it's aspergillus. And you're teaching that dog this is day 1 of detection. You're saying, I want you to find aspergillus. Well, you have to find out what motivates the dog. We have our canine profile already. We know that this is the right dog for the job. It's the right breed, and it's time to go. Well, I can couple that toy or that reinforcer, whether it's food or it could be anything really, anything that motivates that dog with the odor of aspergillus. So what I do is I can either, as soon as that dog smells that box of aspergillus, which is number 3, I will reward that dog instantaneously. And I will continue to do that. So the dog eventually says, Aspergillus gives me my toy. If I find Aspergillus, my toy will eventually come. It is the classical process of Ivan Pavlov, basically. So classical conditioning from the very beginning. You have something that was neutral, like a box with odor in it that meant nothing to the dog, and all of a sudden these boxes mean something because if it has Aspergillus in it, it can get rewarded. So it is no different than ringing a bell and saying, here's food, ringing a bell, here's food. Now, every time they hear the bell, they're assuming that the food is coming. So let's say we do that. Well, the fast mapping part is what we didn't talk about in box one and two and four and five are distractor odors, odors that we may find in its operational environment. So in this case, a home could be your home where you have books in the background, you have plants. I may take a little bit of all those things and put it in these distractor boxes. So what the dog will do in that case to say, okay, box number three has always been my favorite box. It's the one that rewards me. I can move box number three to position one, to position five. It doesn't matter. They understand the distractor odors and they understand the target odor. Well, now I take aspergillus out and I put penicillium in there. And something amazing happens when the dog starts to smell these other boxes. And if I'm going to introduce penicillium, I'll actually put it in position five. So if the dog goes left to right, it sniffs number one, two, three, four, which are distractors that it's never been paid for, that it knows to ignore. But when it gets to five, the dog has never smelled penicillium. So what it does is it makes an inference that is the only thing that has changed in its environment and say, hey, do I get paid for this? And as long as with timing you say yes and you pay the dog, now the dog says, oh, I have a Rolodex in my head about things I get paid for now. And then I take aspergillus out or penicillium out and I put another odor that I want the dog to find. And literally in just a couple days, you can have a library of odors that the dog understands that it needs to respond to. And that's just the foundation. And it's not, I tell everybody, it's not the sexiest thing in the world to do foundation work. Everybody wants to see the really cool things in operational environments. The truth is that foundation is what carries that dog over to being successful in operations. So we take that same drill, and now since the dog understands that those odors essentially mean a reward, then we hide those odors where the dog's going to find it in real world. So behind walls, behind drywall, behind or in an HVAC system, any place that we've traditionally can find mold, we're going to start teaching the dog this is probably where you're going to have success. And the dog will continue those inferences through its life. The more that you train them, the better they get. So, and that's kind of a short version of a very long process. But yeah, that's kind of how we do it.
And I don't know if, I mean, obviously, certain strains are more toxic to the human body than other strains, but essentially, what you're trying to find is where is the mold growing so that we can remove it and then the place can be safe for the human. And so, walk me through, like, let's say you were to come into my house. It looks like you're saying that maybe the dog will start smelling the walls, but how would you do a whole house like detection of if there's mold that I can't seem to find with like an ERMI swab test or having an IEP out and they said the home is clean enough, but I'm still not feeling well?
And this happens all the time, unfortunately, right? Because all of those things have an element that could fail, right?
Right.
ERMI tests are not perfect, an IEP is not perfect. You know what? The dog is not perfect sometimes, depending on where the odor is. It may be not available to the dog to smell. So, if it's behind a wall, we have to ask ourselves, well, what's the availability of that odor to the dog? Often we find it in warmer places like the outlets, because that's where odor is going to collect. It's anytime you have heat, those molecules are going to move more, which means that odor is going to spread. That permeation will often lead to more success for that dog. So if we were going to go to your house and deploy a mold dog there, the first thing we would do is the handler would go around your home and do essentially a safety check. We want to make sure that nothing's going to hurt the dog, that there's nothing obvious, because if maybe you didn't think to look under your sink and then we do and we see that there is a mold colony that's active, we're not going to put the dog there because there's no need for it, right? We're kind of already found the source there. So we're looking for hidden mold. So once we do kind of a sweep of your home, one of the things that we'll do is ask you about 15 minutes to 30 minutes before we arrive is to shut your HVAC system off completely to kind of stagnate everything, for everything to kind of settle. And that's our baseline. So when the dog goes around your home It's getting an idea of what's naturally in here and what's not. Still trying to find those odors that we taught them in that beautiful box game. So it's looking for those odors, it's hunting for those odors. And let's say we don't find anything in your home. And then we say, okay, we're going to give the dog a break. It's going to get some water. Now I'm going to ask you to turn your HVAC system on. And now all of a sudden, when the dog comes in, its nose starts to pick up and it's getting these air molecules that are coming from the HVAC system. And now we're just starting to see change of behavior consistent with what we see in training when the dog is around mold. And this creates a picture for us, both the human and the dog that says, hey, it's probably going to be in your HVAC system, and this is why. And that's just one of the ways that we can do that.
Are there areas, and I'm thinking, for example, maybe the ceiling, but are there area or the roof, but are there areas where it's harder for the dog to detect mold?
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, it goes back to the odor has to be available to the dog in
Okay.
order for it to detect it. Although they're amazing olfactory machines, there still has to be odor present for them to pick up. So, things like time of permeation means a lot. The temperature can often determine whether a dog is successful. The air currents in the home. There's so many little things that could determine whether the dog is successful in finding that mold or not. It's up to us as the humans to try to prep that environment for their success. So there might be things I ask you to do, like, hey, please close all your windows. I don't want any of that air that I want the dog to smell to leave the home. So there are definitely things that we have in the grand scheme of trying to help people get healthy. One of the ways that we have combat the idea of a dog not being able to get into a roof or something like that or a crawl space is I don't know if we talked about it, is we've teamed up with a company called GetScent, and GetScent make these polymer tubes, and these polymer tubes will essentially collect odor over time. And what we do from that point on, so let's say you think it's in a crawl space that really no one can get to. Well, we'll drop that GetScent tube, leave it there for a couple days, up to a week, and then I'll collect it, put it in a vial, and I'll take it back to our lab, and then our dogs will run on all of those GetScent tubes. So we'll have get sent tubes that have been soaked in distractor odors, like your books and your plants. And then we'll have get sent tubes that are specifically from your home that will allow us to get a reading of those spaces that the dog couldn't naturally get to. There's another way, and I haven't even talked about it, but the company that I represent is Mold Dog Knows, that we have kind of pioneered that detection methodology to assist our clients better figure out where the source of the mold is, which is really the point of why we're there.
So once you guys find the mold, do you then work with an IEP? And is it an IEP that you recommend and then you remediate and then you bring back if you can walk me through the process?
Sure. So ideally, it's a three-step process, right? You
Okay.
want some air testing of some kind to suggest that there's something there. But I wouldn't just rely on that. And you know this, if the body doesn't feel good and something is up, listen to the body. So if there are times where these tests are all over the place or they're not consistent, and I can't speak to that because that's not my forte. But if there's a client that says, these are my symptoms, I'm really mold sensitive, I think this is what's going on, we're going to deploy our dogs. So that would be the step two. And then once we source the mold, and it could be multiple places, as you know, it's not always just one place that's growing. Then we want to work with an IEP that not only understands what the dog's capability is, but also understands our report. Because when we go to you, we have what we would call like a canine brief, and it's a description of all the places the dog alerted to, including pictures. And we're creating a picture for the IEP and ourselves to have a better idea, an investigative tool, if you will, to figure out where that source of the mold is. So now instead of having to look all over your house, your IEP is super happy to know that it's concentrated in this part of the home. I don't have to worry about testing other parts of the home or drilling holes or knocking down walls. So ideally, it only not only saves the customer or the homeowner money, but it also it's a direct way to find the source, which makes the IEP's job easier. So we want to work with IEPs that understand the sensitivity of the dog. And oftentimes we work in conjunction with IEPs where they'll have both of us out there because they love to see, who doesn't want to see a dog work, right? So often they're there to see the dogs work. They'll ask questions. They'll analyze the situation because we're all trying to solve this mystery together as a team. So we love some of our IEPs. Off the top of my head, Mike McNatt from Dallas is fantastic. He's worked with us in a lot of different places. And he's getting so good recognizing what the dogs are doing. He often can sometimes understand maybe that a dog did not alert to an area because dormant a mold was there. It's no longer growing, but we found it, but there's no spores basically being produced from those colonies because they're dormant or dead. So the more that we're in this, the more we understand how to help people, and the more we understand how to set up training to best suit operational success.
From what you just said, can the dog smell dormant or, basically dead mold that's no longer producing spores?
Yeah, so in
Okay.
this very new detection discipline of mold detection, the traditional way we looked at it, it was let's teach the dogs how to find live mold. And
Mhm.
that's great. But let me ask you, can a dog find a live body? Of course they can, right? We call them live find dogs or search and rescue dogs. But we also have cadaver dogs, which are finding dead or dormant cells of the body that are just no longer reproducing. They're two different odors. What
Right.
we're doing is teaching the dogs both of them. Because if it's your home, you would want to know where the dormant and alive colonies are, because at any moment those dormant colonies can, with the right conditions,
Yeah.
come alive again. So that's really important for us to do both. So the other thing is, at what point does a live body become a cadaver? No one really actually knows that. At what point do those cells stop reproducing and the dog interprets it as no longer living? So we're in the middle of doing that research now to help the dogs understand, hey, these are two different odors. We understand that the chemical structure is now different, but you can get paid for both of those. So it's actually not hard to do. Like anything else with science, it's about what you can prove,
Right.
and all those things are super important. So with our background and our approach with the scientific studies that we do, we're always going to not only show what we can do, but we want to put it on paper, produce a paper for everyone to see, get it peer reviewed, as you know the importance of that. Yeah, so I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of people now are going to ask or wonder, what is I know it'll depend on the house size and the amount that the dog has to look into, but what's the cost of bringing in a mold dog to do this type of work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the average cost, and now there's multiple mold detection dogs companies out there. So within the last year, I've seen probably an uptake of like times 10.
Oh,
So when I first got in here, and it was just earlier this year, there was maybe a dozen. Well, now there's at least 60 out there in the US. So there are plenty of people who are or deploying mold dogs. So the cost is on average about $1,000.
okay.
That's for a home that's mid-size, anywhere between 2,500 square foot, 2,000, somewhere in between there. Also, the cost really depends on the location that you're at and how far that canine team has to travel.
Okay.
So what's nice about Mold Dog Knows is we have coverage throughout the US. So if we were just simply based out of Dallas, which is our home base, and you were in New Jersey and you needed a dog to go out there, the upcharge would be, having to put the dog on a plane and get a team out there and everything else. But if we have a team in Pennsylvania that can just travel over there, now the travel is much cheaper and keeping that cost down. Our responsibility to our clients is not only to provide a good service, but to do it at a price that they can afford. Because as you know, I mean, mold doesn't care about your finances,
Right.
and it is very expensive. And so our founder, Susan Russell, went through her own mold journey, and it really hurt her relationships, it hurt her career. And with that being said, we have a heart for the people who are going through the struggle. So we're doing the best we can, not only to expand to get to people easier, but as you can imagine, you need the right heart for this job. So everybody that we hire is someone I've hired directly, and I take a lot of pride in that because I want to hire good people who understand what our clients are going through. And there's so many stories out there. The best ones are when we can give them answers where they thought they were going crazy. And you hear this a lot. The wife is symptomatic, the husband is not, so he thinks something is wrong with her. He's not giving the idea of mold and mycotoxins a serious chance. And she gets to the point where she's so sick where he's like, all right, I'm willing to try anything. And then this series of tests happen and we show up and then we're able to show them where the source of mold is, and then healing can finally start. We love that calling. That's really important to us. So everybody that represents Mold Dog Knows has that heart for people. They have the want and desire to serve. So that's always been important for us. So yes, the price is about $1,000, give or take, but we're most proud of the service that we're able to provide and the people that are behind the brand.
The new dog trainers you hire, do you actually test their dog to ensure that you feel they make the sniff test?
Yeah, and so that's super important, right? Because you want consistency and continuity.
Right.
If Mold Dog Knows in Oregon has, we have a deployment over there, and then here locally in Dallas, you want a similar experience. Now, each handler has their own personality. They're going to address and explain things differently, but they're all educated enough about mold to understand the severity of it and understand where, as a company, where we've had most success. So that yeah, that's really important to us.
I really wanted to have you on because when I was going through the whole SIRS proficiency, understanding about biotoxin illness, mold illness, whether it's live or they're non-viable or viable
Yep.
spores, we just hear that the ideal way is to get the ERMI, hurts me too, and then use an IEP that really knows the illness. But then real life happens and you see like how much does this really come out to be true?
Yeah.
And what we found is, so one, I worked with one person that had a lot of resources, so money wasn't a huge issue. And the IEP knew that, and they poked, I think, over 50 holes in their
Oh,
home. And mind you, I think each poke is like $150. And in the end, they just had to remediate, and the home was probably a little bit too much for a SIRS patient. And so they had to sell and leave. And I just
tough.
thought that was a lot of money just for the inspection.
Yeah.
And then the other hand, where people don't have as many resources, they're not going to poke as much. So they'll just ask, where have you ever had water intrusion? Where do you think you've had damage? And so then they'll poke holes there after they've like had a me or hurts me too that shows that there's some type of mold in the home. And then they'll do all the remediation, and then they'll do the small particle cleaning, which is very expensive. You have to think about every single thing in your house you're wiping down and ensuring that it does not get contaminated with a rag you use, for example. So then people go through all that, and then fast forward a few months, and then somehow, some way, they find mold that the IEP had completely missed, that the testing had not shown.
Yeah.
And so I always think now, well, that costs a lot of money. So many of these people then have to go through a second round of remediation. And a lot of people cannot afford that when they barely could afford the first round. So what if we, with an IEP, yes, $1,000 is a lot, but it's not a lot if you had to do any of the things I just brought up.
Yeah.
It's so much cheaper than what I just brought up. And so now I think it may be smarter if you do like your own ERMI Swiffer test and it comes back like, yep, you have some mold in your house, like who knows where. And then I think with an IEP, you should have a mold dog. And I think the two in collaboration, understanding SIRS mold illness,
Yep.
can give you a better chance up front and not have to go through a second round of remediation because it is that much more painful the second time. And we see it with our patients that are not healing enough.
Yeah. And collaboration is so important. And you're a perfect example. You've had people from all walks of life,
Mhm.
all different types of um, jobs, right? All kind of in the same space, but their own stories behind it. You even have people on that disagree with each other and their analysis about, this or that. In this industry, in this specific space of mold detection, there are a couple of things that I think your audience needs to be aware of. Number one, I'm always a little weary about, the story you told about, the IEP drilling a bunch of holes in different places. Well, what we're finding is now we have some IEPs who are also working dogs. So the efficacy of that dog is determined on its training and its certification. So just real quick, let's hit on that because that's super important for your audience to know. So I explained some of the training, the way we approach training, but certification is just as important. If I train a dog, I should not be the one certifying the dog because there's a conflict of interest.
For sure.
If I sold Judy a dog, I also shouldn't certify that dog. So what we have in the police and military world are these third-party, non-biased organizations that certify dogs all over the world. And but the only one that certifies mold detection dogs, and that's something that we're really proud of because nobody wanted to take this space seriously when it came to certifications. Like none of those certifying bodies, when we talked to those boards, were remotely interested in certifying mold dogs. They understand explosives, they understand narcotics and human remains and all that other stuff, but no one understood mold enough to say we'll give it a chance until we worked with the American Working Dog Association, who not only took on and took it serious, but they created the first third party certification for mold detection dogs. So my responsibility in full transparency, I'm their law enforcement secretary. So I help them with the law enforcement stuff. So I was just like, if I can't convince the people I work with that this certification is necessary, we're never going to have one. We're just going to have these in-house ones that don't really mean anything. With that being said, we're super proud that we have that opportunity for dogs to obtain that certification. So if you're looking for a quality dog, I would first ask, are you certified with the American Working Dog Association? And if not, is there another organization you're certified? Let me do some research. Just like you don't want a lawyer that says he's a lawyer but didn't pass the bar. You would want some third party test to recognize the efficacy of that job. So with that being said, there also shouldn't be like if I'm working a dog, I don't think I should be an IEP on top of that because I have a vested interest in the dog alerting literally everywhere to get more money. And that always makes me nervous. So I'd like to separate those two things as much as possible and work with someone that I trust that not only understands my part of the job, but together we can use all of those investigative tools to help the client so they're not having to spend more money. So we are able to say, hey, this is where the source of mold is, so that that journey to health is a lot quicker and maybe not as financially burdensome.
You mentioned that there's like 60 mold dog companies now, which is kind of concerning, especially if it's just after a year. How do we know if, assuming that they didn't use your company, but
Mhm.
how do we know that the other dog companies are training for all the other molds? And what are some questions we should be asking to see, I have comfort that this dog that's coming in
Yeah.
is looking for the molds that generally impact human health, and I can trust that this company is legit.
Yeah, and you know what? There's a lot of amazing stories out there about people who have overcome mold sickness. They were inspired by maybe a mold detection dog coming to their home and they're like, "I want to do that." And that's great. We want people who have a love for this industry to be in it. But there's no shortcut for making sure that they have the education to do that. Just because I'm inspired, if I had surgery or something by my surgeon who took, cancer out, doesn't mean I can now be a surgeon and do the same thing, even though I'm inspired by it. So I would be very careful, just asking simple questions like, have you been a handler before? Can you tell me a little bit about your history? And have you worked other dogs before? And that's not to say that they're not efficient and could do the job, but those are the starting questions that I would ask. And then the certification is the big one. And we're pushing everybody to, education is a big part of what we're trying to focus on is this exists. Please go get the certification because now you can say that you've been accredited in that manner on your website, and people can start looking for the American Working Dog Association seal to say this team is certified, which means they not only know one mold, which a lot of companies will do that, they know a family of molds that are going to carry over and have success. You specifically asked about how do I know if that dog team can, have success with different types of mold. Let me go over that real quick because dogs also do something that's absolutely incredible called generalizing. So I'm going to use an analogy here that's interesting but curious to some people at the same time. Crack cocaine, which and powder cocaine have different cutting agents. And the
Okay.
cutting agents themselves actually are the more predominant odors within that odor. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the dogs can say the methyl benzoid within the crack cocaine and powder cocaine is what I need to focus on.
Mm.
I can generalize those two odors, even though they smell significantly different. I'm going to focus on the similarities. So when we're teaching dogs to generalize through the foundation process, we can do that right away. So Aspergillus niger and regular Aspergillus, the dog will alert to both of them because they can find the commonalities between the two, aka generalize. So our responsibility as trainers is to introduce as many different types of mold to that dog and have them have success so they understand anything within these MVOCs, these microbial volatile organic compounds, we can alert to and have success in. So a dog can have success finding an odor for the very first time because of its ability to generalize. So I don't want people to focus on, well, how many odors can your dog find? Well, we actually don't know because we don't know how well that dog can generalize. The better question would be, what does your training look like? And are you certified? Because in the certification, there are six family of molds that the dog has to find in order to pass.
That's fascinating. Tell me a little bit about the changes in the mold, overall view of mold. Let's not, you mentioned a couple companies. I don't need you to bring them up specifically, but
Sure.
if you want to generalize how you think the mold, the cautionary story about mold is being more widely accepted.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's important to say that, social media has some good things and some bad things about it. And for mold, it's been a really good thing
Right.
recently because it's not hard to research how serious mold can be and how devastating it can be to a family, mental health, physical health, neurological health. There's so many things that it was almost an old wives' tale. I remember seeing mold in my home as a kid and not thinking anything of it. It was just a home that was built in the early 1900s in New Jersey. It is what it is. We just kind of lived with it.
Yeah.
But now knowing what I know now, I'm thinking like, wow, how did that affect me? Maybe I wasn't as dumb as I thought I was in school. Maybe I could have had straight A's and not C's and just barely pass. Who knows? But as a whole, I think it's safe to say people are taking it serious, and it's not necessarily looked at as a taboo subject, almost like mental health, right? I feel like mental health has seen strides forward in the same way mold and mycotoxins and even heavy metals in the body has been looked at more seriously. So I'm happy to see that. I'm happy that there are creators like yourself and the Petersons who also are really putting a lot of focus and attention in those subjects. I think it's super important to have people with, well, like channels like yours to be able to speak to that and to bring other people because there's an infinite amount of people that have been affected, in my opinion, by mold and mycotoxins. Some of them have no idea that they've been
Right.
affected. So I think it's really important that we educate people, that we collaborate. I've been on a couple podcasts recently, and 2026 for us, our whole goal is collaboration. I want to collaborate with as many people as possible. I want to bring the science and the efficacy of these dogs to the forefront and say, we can help fix this problem. It is not just a dog issue. We can't just fix it alone. We need help. But having that collaboration of IEPs and other people within the space is really important. So I'm happy to say significant difference in the last year, even when I just got into the industry to now. But that goes back to people like yourself who are pushing good information. So thank you for that.
No, I love that when I talk to you, you are really based in the science and being able to prove and then show that evidence. And I know you are trying to publish some papers. And so maybe if you want to touch on that, if you're able to,
Sure.
but I love that you also then separately have shown the evidence in your career of, working with explosives and drug detection. And it's not just, hey, I'm new to this mold thing and
Yeah.
and it's and I think that there's so much power in that because I've heard of other companies that do dog detection for mold and I've always been a little hesitant, but then when you shared all that you shared and some of the stuff that we're not sharing publicly, I wanted to have you on because I think there is science. And now that I have a dog, and I was telling you offline, but my dog, and he's a little one, but he will bark at something and we look at everything, we're like, there's nothing there. And after one or two times, every time we have to uplift the whole bed and everything, and we will find the very small thing he was looking at because he smells it. And
Incredible.
so that since then, I know how strong, and my dog is not even trained to smell things. And
Yeah.
I know whenever now he barks at something, we know 100% that there's something there. And so we'll keep looking as humans until we
Yeah.
find the thing that he's looking for. And so to me, it's very, very obvious that this might be a solution when I don't want our patient side to have to remediate 2, 3 times and then feel and affect their nervous system where they're like, I'm never going to get better. I'm never going to get all the mold out of my house. And I don't want that. So if we can do it right the first time, and I'm 100% support that, tell me a little bit about any research that you're looking forward to or more of the science that you're trying to push and establish in this space for mold and dogs.
Sure. Yeah, and this time next year we hope to be able to finish those studies. And
Okay.
so one of the big questions when I came in here was what are dogs actually smelling when it comes to mold? How many families of odors do I need to introduce to a dog before generalization kind of carries over and the dog has operational success? And then how small are those mold particles? So you have mold spores or the MVOCs, right? We hear a lot of times the MVOCs is what the dogs are picking up. And I heard that over and over and over again. And there is scientific literature that came out of FIU in 2009 with Dr. Frank, sorry, Dr. Furton rather, that suggested that the dogs are picking up the MVOCs. This is why in the space you hear that over and over again. That's where that came from. So that's important. But we have done a bunch of research since 2009 in different categories that suggest the dog can sniff much deeper than where the MVOC space would be. That would be at the micrometer, right? So the micrometer, to give your audience kind of an idea of how small that would be. If you took a piece of hair from your head right now and the diameter of your hair was the size of the earth, a micrometer would be maybe the size of Texas, right? So you're talking about very, very small, and that's impressive in itself. But we know dogs can sniff to the nanometer, which would be using that same analogy about 2 or 3 football fields, using that same analogy. So it's even deeper. And at that level, you have DNA and you have mycotoxins, which are really, really important in this space to figure out whether dogs can sniff. So we have the hypothesis based on other studies that they can. We just don't have the established ability to separate mycotoxins, put it in a container, and say, here, dogs, smell this. This is what you need to find. We have interesting ways that we're going to try to solve this problem. But the reason why that's important is if we can teach the dogs to smell mycotoxins, it's a game changer because we could almost instantly tell not only where it is, but it doesn't matter if it's dormant, doesn't matter if it's alive, and we can be more effective in that regard. So it is my desire, it's my hope, it's my prayer that we're going to be able to show that. But dogs, have anytime we did a study, dogs will always humble you. So there'll always be something that they teach us through the process, but I'm fairly confident we're going to be able to do it. The hard part is just setting up the study in a way where it can be replicable and
Sure.
accepted.
That'll be really cool. Mycotoxins, I was just writing about this in my book, but mycotoxins are plaguing not only animals, farm animals, but all the feed that they're eating. And
Mm,
it's such a big driver of loss financially, even in the animals, they have to take them out. And so there's a
yeah.
lot of research on how to reduce mycotoxins, not only in the feed, but in animals that get sick from it. So imagine if your dogs could go to a farm and already detect it because it's a lot of times it's not visible to the eye.
Yep.
And then the animals will eat this and then consistently eat it and then get sick. And then now the animal is, non-viable. And so it's a bigger issue. And then all this medication is needed and binders. And I mean, this can be really life-changing and game-changing. So I'm really excited about that.
There's
Go ahead.
plants and stuff like that that often will get affected by mycotoxins. So those mycotoxins wreak havoc in different forms. So we hope in this research for mold that it can carry over to other places in the health
Right.
realm, if you will. Again, we don't deserve dogs. They're amazing. But if we can prove this and do it and isolate all those odors, we're going to be onto something pretty amazing.
So because we both love dogs, I have to
Yeah.
ask, how do we ensure that these dogs that are trained to sniff out mold are not getting sick themselves?
Yeah. Such an important question because anytime that, and it's happened more recently, I've been asked to speak on this subject about people who are interested in it. I always get upset when people don't ask that question, right? Because they're everyone's dog people. And I'm like, does anybody not want to know how we confirm that the dogs don't get sick here? And they're
Yeah.
like, oh, yeah, oh my God, that's crazy. Yeah. How do you do it? Well, the truth is, there's a couple ways. Number one, we limit exposure.
Okay.
So this is why in that example I gave you before, if we see mold, we don't put the dog there because there's no reason for that.
Right.
We can analyze that from just our eyes and say that's mold. So with that being said, there are a couple of ways that even in training that we can reduce that. We do have what we would call synthetic training aids. It's basically taking the odor signature of those molds, capturing it, and putting it in a delivery system that only has the odor without the dangerous MVOCs or spores or anything like that. So it's not active mold, it's just basically capturing the odor. So that's nice to be able to do. It has this the things that we have to kind of overcome because anytime you introduce something to an odor, you have to proof the dog off of. So let's say we soaked the MVOCs of penicillium in cotton. Well, that's great, but now we have to make sure the dog doesn't alert to cotton
Okay.
because that could be a problem. Because in your home, I'm pretty sure there's some cotton items there. And if we don't do it correctly, we run the risk of false alerts.
Okay.
So anytime you're dealing with the signs of odor, you have to be very intentional about what you're introducing to the dog and what it interprets as the target odor. So that's just one way that we can eliminate long-term exposure because that's the key. And we can confirm that by having 3 month, 6 month checkups at our vet to check lungs, do blood work, all the same tests that you would want for you if your family potentially sick, we do for our dogs to make sure that they're healthy. And what's nice is we do blood work in the beginning because that's our baseline. We know it's normal for that dog. So any deviation from that 3 months or 6 months or 12 months out, we know that, okay, there may be something to this. So we're very intentional about documentation of our training and how much actual live time around live odor that the dog has. And the good thing is they don't need a lot of time. Once they learn the odor, it's in that Rolodex in their memory forever. It's not going to go away. So once you do that, you can supplement your training with these pseudo training odors for safety reasons and then reinforce it on real deployments.
Yeah, we have a lot of families that obviously have dogs. And so we will just recommend, obviously, we're not treating the actual dog, but we will just give a general recommendation of you can also give your dog a little bit of binders in their food,
Oh yeah.
ensuring they're still having bowel movements. And then
Yeah.
you could use like drops of glutathione and vitamin C and any of the detox things, because I think for in general, dogs seem to detox a little bit better.
Yeah.
But there are ways that you could support. But yeah, it's I think a dog's gift is their nose. And if a family is sick and oftentimes they have a dog anyway, that dog's getting sick too. So why not possibly bring in a dog that's highly trained to support the whole family from not getting sick anymore? So I think it's a really big win if it's done right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Where can people find, if you have any certain locations you want to share that obviously you mentioned Dallas, but if there's other states, if you're all 50 states, great. But if you want to just plug your company and,
Sure.
is there a wait for like, how does the services start?
Yeah, so the first thing you can do is just go to molddogknows.com and it's not Nose, it's like the knowledge of the dog. So KNOWS,
Okay.
molddogknows.com. They'll go there, they'll be prompted on where they're at, and they can immediately see that we have a dog either close or close enough to get to them. We're covering all aspects of the US. We will always be able to reach you in the US. We're working on getting an international team right now because, as you imagine, this is not just something that we here in America have to worry about, it's the world.
Right.
So we've learned a lot about this space. So molddogknows.com. You can follow us on social media and do it that way. But we have teams locally in Dallas. We have teams in the Vegas area, so Nevada. We have teams in Oregon. We have teams in Ohio. We have teams in Chicago. So
Okay.
those are all of our teams. So they're spread out pretty good. We're gonna add a team in Florida here soon, I hope, because that's a pretty big hot spot
Yeah.
for a lot of mold. It's been crazy over there, but. Yeah, that's so molddogknows.com is the best way to do it. Same thing with social media and molddogknows. Please reach out to us if you have some questions. Information and collaboration is like I said, what we're focusing on in 2026. The more good information is out there, the better informed the customer is going to be. Even if you don't use us, we want to be able to inform you on what you should be looking for to make sure you get good service. Because unfortunately, anytime there's a need, there always be, let's just say, people who will want to take advantage of that need for financial gain. And
Always.
that's it's so it breaks my heart. So we don't want to name anybody by name. That's not what we're trying to do. We would rather combat bad information with good information.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you so much for your time again. I can work on the person. I could recommend all the things for the house, but if the house is not safe
Mm.
enough, and so many houses are not safe, where does the person go, even if they know that they have the illness? And so, people like you, people that can fix the home that we want to think is a safe haven, it's fundamental for healing. And so, that's why it's so important to collaborate in this sense. So, thank you so much again.
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
If you are thinking of remediating your home or you've remediated your home and you're not 100% sure your home is safe, a mold dog inspection may just be a viable option. As mold or SIRS or mold illness becomes more popular, it will be harder to sift through the right information, good players and bad players. And that is a truth in anything that gets more attention, because more attention usually brings in more money. And the hope is that as you learn more and you become more empowered with information and questions to ask when you are hiring a practitioner, when you're hiring an IEP, and you're hiring possibly a remediation company or a mold dog company, you know the questions to ask, so you have a level of comfort in who the person or the company that you select. It's not easy being out there, even for some of us who have recommended other practitioners or other companies. We are human, and at the end of the day, we are going to make mistakes. But if we can learn more about this illness and the things to look out for, the empowerment to ask the right questions, we will be much better along and measuring multiple times the first time so we could get it right when we actually implement the changes. I look forward to going out to where Stephen trains and meeting all the dogs. And if I do, I will absolutely share it with you guys. And I hope that this conversation gives you another clue and way that you can support your home to be safe for you, because no one wants to suffer from mold illness. All right, guys, make sure to eat a lot of meat. Take care of your bodies, because it is the only place you have to live. I will talk to you later. Bye, guys.